We have a task for you in the library. This is not merely a filler. There is something that we're going to kick off the learning for the module before you come back for a brief session with Tineke towards the end of the evening. Module 2.2, roles of other professionals in the early years. First of all, the first thing I need to ask you is, do you have a module handbook? Have you been issued with the module handbook? Good. Excellent. In which case you know this, and this is not something that I need to read out to you in a in sort of fashion. PowerPoint karaoke is not my thing. But there are a number of things that I thought you might want to notice at this point. The first is that it recognises the importance of professional roles across the board in the field of early years. This is not something where you will necessarily need to list everything that a speech and language therapist does, everything that an autism outreach worker would do, everything that someone who works with looked after children will do. It actually knows already, the module recognises that you already have that kind of expertise. We're not doing that kind of tick off stuff here. It's building on your knowledge and understanding, but it builds on it. It's not just rehearsing it. The idea is that it takes you a stage further, and it will facilitate some sense of your understanding more deeply the kind of ways in which professionals work together. And so that's the module description as you've got it in the module handbook. Let's think about the assignment. The assignment is in two parts, and again, this is in the module handbook and is fairly straightforward, but each is weighted at 50%. Now that's important for you to know, because generally, presentation elements or group elements, we do at about 30%. This is at 50% precisely because you need to reflect as you go through on the ways in which people communicate, in the ways in which different professional groups will work together. There is also an individual written assignment, but this has its own trickiness, and that is that an individual written assignment is only 1,500 words. For those of you already used, as I know you are, to writing much longer pieces of work, that in itself presents a challenge, and we're going to be looking at that in a few moments. So the group presentation element is part of it, the individual written assignment is the other part, and let's just look at some of the key questions I think that come up when we think about the group presentation. On an aspect of professional working roles is part of what we're doing, and actually what you're going to be asked to do is you're going to be asked to divide into groups and look at one particular article and critique it to the rest of your peers. Now, with not everybody else here tonight, dividing people up like that is going to be a little bit problematic, but we'll do what we can on that. It needs to be interactive and informative. It does not need to be a rehearsal. I saw a really dire practice, in fact, in this room on Wednesday night, where just a bunch of students sat and read a presentation to each other like this. Do it so that your colleagues come away from your session knowing something new, understanding something new, or full of questions about why you took that line on the piece of work that you're doing. Informative, interactive is the way that you should go. It's not necessarily entirely performance related, nor is it something so dry as dishwater that it's just not going to work for people. It's going to draw on the literature, therefore, but it's not necessarily a scholarly critique. I'm not necessarily looking, or at least I don't think anybody marking this is necessarily going to look for detail beyond detail beyond detail. We're looking for something that tells it like it is, because it's communicating with your peers. That's the point of it. It's about giving a presentation to peers on an aspect in the way that you might want to present some of this material. If somebody said, so, tell me about multi-professional working. Could you do something for the Board of Governors, or could you do something for the Management Committee? That's that kind of thing. You will certainly want to draw on scholarly literature, research literature, but not necessarily in the depth that we might look for if this were a larger piece of work. Now, what size of groups and how long I'll come on to in a minute, because this is what I go through next. There's a series of papers. And what the idea will be is that everybody will... Actually, why don't I hand these round? That's probably the easiest way. As I said, this is the kind of thing that doesn't require a huge amount of pre-reading, though it obviously requires a certain level of expertise, and I can see that some of you have already taken advantage of being here to go up to the library. Well, that's great. I think groups of about 4 and 5 are useful for this. Large enough to have an impact, but actually if you have 6s and 7s, everybody gets to say half a sentence, and they don't really have the sense of anything that's really interactive. You could, for example, have a group of 4 and a 5th person animating groups on the tables, if that's the way you want to do it. Something that gets people thinking, gets people talking is the way forward with this. And the presentation will be about 20 minutes. Let me take you a bit further. What you've got in front of you is the grid by which we look at and make judgments about presentations. And there's also a feedback sheet. I gave a bunch of students a feedback sheet last week and they said, shall we start filling it in? I don't mean you to fill it in, but just so you can see the kind of things that I think your assessors will be looking for in this. Clear structure and flow, I think, is very important in these things. You really need to do something where there's a sense that you all know what you're talking about. Now, I think that's easier in this than it is in some, because you're looking at one article. You're not looking at a range of ideas, you're just looking at one article. So one of you might want to introduce the content of the article. One of you might want to then say how it links to practice. Somebody else then might want to say, well, how it links to other things that you've read. And somebody else might like to get the conversation going, so you don't do that thing. I hate that at the end of anything, and I'm going to do it to you in a minute, of just going, any questions? And the tumbleweed rolls across the classroom. It might be that your other person is there to kind of start animating some questions. So some kind of flow. Visual aids appropriate, clear, produced at a high standard. Please don't go overboard on this. It is 50% of the assignment, I know, but nobody is necessarily looking for something that looks like a cross between a grand opera and the latest Disney feature. And I have seen people over-deliver on this kind of work before, where actually, if you need a PowerPoint, for example, a couple of slides just to keep you on track is probably all you need. A juicy quote from the article. A juicy quote that's not from the article. We'll see a picture, I'd better warn you, we will see a picture of Michael Gove in a minute. And one of the things that I know Michael Gove is on record as saying is that teachers in particular should stop being social workers. That's an interesting thing for you to debate, given the kind of reading that you're going to be asked to do. Visual aids, therefore, appropriate to the content, and the presenter's confident. Some changes in pitch, tone and speed. I mean, no, it's nodified to say it, and I'm sure you're fine at this, but that kind of, I'm going to read it like this, and that's the best I'm going to... It doesn't make for good learning for anybody, so make it nice and lively, and some audience involvement through activity or questioning. And when I say through activity, I mean it. Maybe when you're looking at the Morrow and Mail-in article, you want to do some kind of family mapping exercise with the rest of your table, rather than just tell them the stuff that you're doing. Anything that would allow your group, the people that you're with, to learn from what you're doing, I think is the way forward. Are you with me so far? Does this all make sense? Okay? Any questions so far? Because we move on from this.
If you do use a quote on your slide, do you then have to have another slide with your forward referencing to say where you got it from?
Oh, it's turned out nice again.
Okay.
It's a good question. I must admit, it might be that one of the visual aids you wanted to produce was a piece of A5 with 3 or 4 sources on it for further reading, which would help everybody else with the assignment. That might be what you choose to do. I know what you mean, but actually, unless, Tinica, you have a particular desire to see lots of...
obsessed with Harvard referencing. I want to see it everywhere.
Okay.
I like to see it in people's random notes. I do spot checks of people's
Yes,
notes. And
yes.
check.
I was checking the tissues in the men's bathroom only recently just to check that they were.
It's very gratifying that it's about fitness for purpose, isn't it? And I think you're absolutely right. To provide a sort of handout that people can take away and follow up on if they're interested seems like a very, very good idea. But sometimes the quote just needs to stand alone so that people can go, ooh.
Yeah. And maybe there's something in this or in something else you've read that is so inspirational, you just want to have that. I went to a talk on Friday on my own research area, and all the presenter had done was produce 5 juicy quotes from the authors that she was discussing. And actually it spoke volumes. If that's what you want to do, then I think Tineke is right. That phrase, this is fit for purpose. The brief is that you are presenting to your peers. You're not presenting to Tineke or to Elaine or Barbara or me or anybody else. You are presenting so that you are both the teachers and the learners. It's practicing that skill. Once when I taught this module here, I had a student come to me and say, you know it's 50% of the mark. Can I drop 50% and still pass this module? Because I just don't want to do it. And actually what we said to her was, well, first of all, no. But also the idea that really you should feel confident, not maybe doing this, but at least discussing, engaging in a professional conversation is something that I think is key to why you're doing this course, what you're getting out of it. And that's one of the reasons why we've asked for 50% and why I'm spending this time guiding you through this.
Especially this module.
Yeah.
Especially multi-agency working. I mean, having now worked with teachers and social workers at different levels, you know, you've got to have some kind of professional confidence, you know, the ability to actually sort of stand your ground on an issue. And since it is just for your peers, this seems to be a good way of practicing it.
So you're okay with that. Any more questions on this bit of the assignment before I move on? Okay. That's not to say that in a week's time you won't be thinking, I wish I'd asked. Well, that's what Tineke will be here for. And if Tineke doesn't know the answer immediately, then there is a whole team of other partner colleges who are willing to help us out with guidance. So that's not a problem. The materials that we've got today are from the person organising the module elsewhere, so that we've got a consistency across all the partner colleges. So you're not alone in this. Solihull are doing it, Swindon are doing it, and we'll all work in concert. So if there's any doubt, it's because Tineke will need just to check with them that we're on the right lines. We must be sure about that. That's why it carries 50% of the marks. You should sound like the expert, because you will be the expert. You will have read that article. They're all good articles, they're all decent articles in their own way. The Angela Anning, for example, I particularly like. The Moral and Mailing was my idea a while ago. But you are going to be the people who say, this is what this is about. And you're going to present your ideas with some confidence. Okay, the second part of the assignment is the individual written assignment. And it's 1,500 words, and as I've already intimated to you, that makes it a tricky assignment. You can either do a case study, so that you can talk about how a multi-agency approach supports a practitioner using the multi-agency approach, supports one child's learning and development. That's one way of doing this, through focus on a child. The other way, and this is particularly if you don't work in a setting where you use a lot of different agencies, or where it wouldn't be appropriate for you to do a case study approach, is to do something a little bit more abstract, 1,500 words on multi-agency working in the early years, what we call a critical analysis. So you've got a choice here. I would suggest you think about that, chat about it this evening when we have a break, to say, well, what is it that I need to be doing? What do I want to do with this? Because we're very conscious that you do not have a great deal of time here, which is why we're putting this session together. I think probably you need to make a choice, either this week or immediately after next week, so that you know what you're doing. Not that you need to tell us, but I think it's not something that if you leave people an option, you can allow people just to say, well, I'll do this one just when I start typing.